So fine, welcome everybody. So yesterday we had seen some basics of Selenium, how to download, configure Selenium, what are the concepts of object-oriented programming, fine. And today I will talk about how to interact with web pages using Selenium Webdriver. Yesterday I talked about basic classes like Chrome driver, then Firefox driver. I talked about all of them, right? So just let this Eclipse open up just a minute. So we'll move further on, right? This was the project which we made yesterday, day 1. In this project, hold on, right? In this we made these all classes, right? And in these classes, hold on. In these classes, some of the classes were basic Java classes, some of them were basically the Selenium classes, in which I had opened up Firefox driver and all everything. Now what happens in case I want to interact with the web page? How do I do that? Selenium is an automation testing tool which only works on browsers. Okay. Now in this, for example, if I open up any browser, how does Selenium work on a browser? You need to understand that first. Selenium actually goes into the page source and it works on the page source, the HTML language. So if you are good in HTML, if you know the concepts of HTML, right, then learning Selenium for you will be very easy. I'm going to cover the concepts of HTML language with you briefly. Along with that, I would request, if you are serious enough to learn this tool, then your work would be very easy if you just go through an HTML tutorial as well on a website. If you go to any website, 23 schools, just go through this basic HTML tutorial. This will help you a lot, just through the basic one, nothing more. It will just take half an hour, right? I'll also talk about HTML with you. Okay, the question being asked is, please make the screen big so that we can see clearly. If you double click on your screen, right, the WebEx screen, if you double click on it, the screen will fit to the appropriate size on your desktop. Okay, that's the best we can do with WebEx. Alright, now what I'll do is I'll talk about the concepts of HTML with you now. Before I move over, how does Selenium identify objects? Before I move over to that topic, so what I'll do is I'll actually make a file over here, an Excel file named as html.xls. Okay, and in this file I'll be making 3 columns. First would be the column called element, then tag, hold on just a minute, you get to know, mandatory attribute and optional attribute. Okay, I'm going to make these 4 tags over here, 4 columns, sorry, right? And I'll just increase the font size as well so that it's visible to everybody very clearly, right? Now in this I'll keep the various HTML component names and all everything, right? For example, what all HTML components we have? We have a link, we have a button on a page, we have a text field, we have a radio button, we have a checkbox on a web page with which we want to interact, then we have select a drop list is there, sometimes a select box, fine. We have normal text on the application, right? So these are the general elements which are there on a web page with which you interact with. Along with that, you have got elements like which are not visible to the normal human eye. Elements like web table is there, menu elements like sometimes the frame comes up, right? So these are not visible to normal human eye, right? But these HTML components are visible to us, right, on a regular view, right? They are visible, and every element has a particular tag name associated with it, right? The first thing which you need to do is that in your browser, in your Mozilla browser, let's start with Mozilla, then I'll talk about Chrome and IE as well, right? Just go to Google and just type download Firebug. Firebug is an add-on inside Mozilla, right? You'll get this thing and you can add this thing Firebug out here, okay, and just a minute, right? So you can add this Firebug to the browser, okay, and make sure that you open this in Firebug. Don't try to add it by using Chrome and just clicking on this add to Firefox button. Okay, don't try it with that. Make sure that you open it in Mozilla and install it, add to Firefox. It will get added as an add-on in Mozilla, and in the end you will see a icon like this on the top right with a bug on it, right? This will actually, if you click on this will open up the screen like this, Firepath, okay, with the extension called with this a screen like this having console, HTML, CSS, script, DOM and all everything. You will not get Firepath over here. Firepath I'll tell you later on. But what this does is, if you on this Firebug, if you have this arrow, okay, if you click on this arrow and move your mouse on the page, you will see the HTML code from this page. For example, I'll just take a simple example. I go to Gmail. Okay, I go to Gmail, I open Firebug and I click on this cursor and I move over to the username field. So I get the code of the username field that will be displayed. It's an input type with ID, email and all everything. So this is the HTML code which forms the username field. Similarly, if you look at the sign in button, you can inspect the sign in button as well. This is the HTML code. Now in HTML, every element starts with this conical bracket and ends with the conical bracket, right? And every element has a tag name. For example, out here the tag name of this element is div, the tag name of this element is input. So all these are tag names, input. The tag name over here is h2, this is again a div tag. So these are known as tag names. Every element has a particular tag name. For example, in case of a link, for example, if I look at this learn more link, the learn more link has a tag name called A, that is known as anchor tag, which most of you must be knowing. Okay, so the element link has the tag name A. Right, for a button, in case of a button, this is true for all the HTML pages. Okay, in case of a button will always have a tag name called input. Alright, a tag name called input. So every element, hold on, right, every element has a particular tag name, and along with the tag you have certain other properties. These properties are known as attributes. For example, ID is an attribute, class is an attribute. So these attributes are associated with a tag. Similarly, div is a tag and class is an attribute associated with that tag. Alright. Now in the other cases, for example, in case of a text field, right? If you investigate a text field, for example, I investigate the username text field, the tag name will always be input. Okay. So in case of a text field also, the tag name is input. Right. From my experience, I know that for radio button checkbox, the tag names are input. A button, text field, radio button, and checkbox, all these things have a tag name called the input tag. A drop list, right? What is a drop list? A list like this on the page. Okay, this list on the Gmail welcome page is the drop list, and this list has a tag name called select. Okay, so always remember that the list has a drop tag name called select, and for a text there is no particular one tag name. There can be multiple tag names, like sometimes text comes in para tag P, sometimes in div, sometimes in label tag, sometimes in span, sometimes in H1, H2, heading tags, H3, you might have heard about them. So there is no particular tag name for a text. Okay, and web table and frame, we will not talk about it right now. In general, this is the tag name table for web table, and iframe is for the frame. But what are these? Many of you might be knowing, many of you might not be knowing, and I'll talk about them later on. But right now, I'll just focus on these HTML components. Right. So every HTML component has a tag name associated with it, and the tag has got certain attributes associated with it. Okay. Now, out of these attributes, some of the attributes are mandatory and some of them are optional. For example, if I look at this learn more link, in the learn more link, you will see that the tag name anchor has an attribute called href. This href attribute will point towards the URL to which this learn more link is pointing to. If I click on this learn more, then this particular URL will actually open. If you look at this link, can't access your account, then this link has got can't access your account link, has got this anchor tag A, but it has got an ID attribute, an href attribute, a target attribute. There are multiple attributes with it, but every link will have an href attribute. Href is a mandatory attribute for a link. Rest, all of the attributes like ID, target, these are optional. Fine. So in case of a link, the mandatory attribute is href, hyper reference link, right? So now in this there is a button as well. In case in HTML there is a button as well, and if you look at a button, for example, I look at the sign in button. In case of buttons, again I have attributes like ID, class, type, value, name. Fine. Out of all these attributes, in a button the type attribute is mandatory. If you have the type equals to submit, that means it's a button. If the tag name is input, right, all the fields, button, text field, radio button, checkbox, drop list, these four fields have the same tag names. But if an attribute called type equals to submit is there with the attribute, with the input attribute, then it becomes a button. From my experience, I'll tell you, if the type is equal to text, then it becomes a text field. If type attribute is equal to radio button, if the tag name is input and the in mandatory attribute the type is radio, then it becomes a radio button. And if type is equal to checkbox, then it becomes a checkbox. Right. Similarly, a drop list has the tag name select, but there is no mandatory attribute, not applicable. In case of a drop list, there is no mandatory attribute, and in case of a text field as well, there is no mandatory attribute. Okay, so these are the tag names associated with the elements, and these are the mandatory attributes. The combination of these help you to identify the objects in Selenium. Now, along with that, you have got some optional attributes. Okay, optional attributes are like ID, name, class. Okay, attributes like these, they are optional attributes. Okay, and what you can do is you can take them over here. Any element can have these attributes, right? So I was here that I was telling you these are the mandatory attributes and optional attributes. Fine. Now in Selenium you use combination of these to identify the elements through various techniques. Okay. Now how do you identify elements with Selenium? Right. There are various techniques, and if you look at the documentation of Selenium, if I open up the documentation, just hold on. If I write download Selenium and I go to the documentation and I open Java doc, then in Java docs you will see that there is an interface. Sorry, there is a class. There is a class called by. Okay, by class is actually used, has got the mechanisms used to locate element within a document. Document means web page. Okay, document means a web page. So out here in this class there are various ways. You can identify an object by its class name, by CSS selector, by using ID, by using link text, name, partial link text, tag name, the tag which we discussed right now, okay, and XPATHS. Out of these, the most commonly used things are, we use sometimes class names, CSS selectors are used a lot, XPATHS are used a lot, IDs are also used. So it depends on the application you are testing, it depends. So these are the ways in which you can identify. What are these? I am going to discuss them right now with you. Okay, but how do I use this class? Okay, I use this class this way that, hold on, I'll make a new project, Day-2. Look, I'm just talking about basic things. If you are the one looking for projects, if you are the one who is looking for design of a framework and all, then you'll have to have some patience, because there are people in this training who don't have a good background. So that's why I'll have to include the Selenium jar files again in this project. Right. So yesterday I told you that we'll be going in 3 phases with this whole training. Okay. Now in Day-2 source folder, I'll make a new file, say gmail.java, a simple one. Okay, not a very complex example. To start with, a very simple example of Gmail, and I will write WebDriver, or a simple statement like Firefox driver equals to new Firefox driver. Okay, then driver dot get. I'm not talking about validations, I'm not talking about reporting around, not about testing. Basically I'm talking about how to use WebDriver, because that's the most important thing. Okay, so you get to the website http gmail.com. After going to Gmail, suppose I need to enter my username. Okay, if you write driver dot, you will get all the functions associated with Firefox driver coming from the WebDriver interface. Okay. Now there is a function called find element. Okay, there is a function called find element. All right. You know what? Every time you look at this, you get the function. Now I want to know what this function does. I will open up my documentation. I will search for WebDriver interface in it, and I will go to the function called find element. Now this function is there in the WebDriver interface, but it is actually implemented in the Firefox driver class. Okay. Now this find element function, if I click on it, it actually finds the element. You have to write by the criteria by which you want to find the element. Okay. So you can write over here driver dot find element by, okay, dot by which criteria. I want to find the element by the, say, ID. Okay, and you mention the ID of the element over here. Now in my Gmail page, we know that if you spy the username field, then there is an optional attribute called ID equals to email in it. So if I put email over here, I will be able to find the element. Now there are two things associated with this. The first thing is this: what is by dot? What is by over here? By is a class, right? But how can I access an element in the class by writing class name dot? For example, yesterday I had made a class called house.java. It had a house number and an address. From my test house.java, I was creating the objects of the house class and then accessing the variables. Can I access it like this? House number. No, I cannot do that. Then how am I able to access the by class like this? By is a class, and inside this I can access the functions directly without creating the names. Sorry, without creating the object. I am able to directly call by dot the class variable or the class function. This is because in your class house, right? Suppose I make a string called city, okay, and I write static in front of it. If I make a variable or a function static, then this function or variable will not remain the part of the object. Yesterday we had seen that in the class test house, I was creating the objects of the house class. Right? Every object had a copy of house number in it. Okay, but in your house class, if any variable is static, then it is no longer a property of the object. Okay, it resides something like this. These are the objects in your memory. Every object will have a copy of its own variable, but if the variable is static, then it is stored at a common location in the memory and all the objects can refer from that. Okay, so if in my house, if I am making the city static, then I can access it directly. I can write house dot city is equal to, say, London. Then all the house objects will have the city as London. All the house objects H1, H2, H3 automatically will have the city as London. If I write over here system.h1.city, h2.city and h3.city and run this, all the objects will have the city as London. But I will get a warning that city is static, do not access it with an object. All the static fields, it's not mandatory, but it's a good practice that you should access them by writing the class name dot the property name or the function name. The same thing is out here. In by class, all these criteria by which you identify our objects, ID, link, text, name, partial instance, all are static in nature. Okay, so that's why when you write in your code driver.find element by the criteria ID. ID is static, so you can simply write by dot. When you write by dot, all the things which are static, they come with the S red tag over here. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, it comes with the red tag over here. Right. Now driver.find element. Now you have found the element by the ID email. You want to interact with it. So ID is a optional attribute. Okay. And what does find element return you? If you look at the find element function, hold on. Yeah. If you look at the find element function, it returns you the object reference of an inbuilt interface in WebDriver known as web element. Now this is something important and something new. Okay, the nomenclature is like this. You have to write web element, maybe username is equal to this. Okay, just hold on guys. Okay, so I hope you are able to hear me. Okay, now you write web element username equals to this. Now what is web element? Web element is an interface. Okay, in a layman's language, web element interface represents all the elements on your web page. If you have studied QTP, then don't actually compare this web element with the web element of QTP. Don't compare this web element with the web element of QTP. The web element of QTP is different than this web element. Okay, don't compare it with that. This web element it practically represents all the elements on the page. A button, a link, a field, all the elements are represented by this web element interface in Selenium. Whenever you write driver.find element, maybe you find element on any of these criteria, ID, link text name, partial link text, CSS selectors, XPATHS, you will always get the object reference of web element interface. Okay, and this web element interface has got the functions which you can perform with any element on a web page. For example, clear. Clear will clear the field value. For example, there's a text field, you want to clear the value of the text field. There's a click function, you want to click on an object. You find element. I'll talk about this one. Right. For example, get location. It will give you the XY coordinates of the object. Get size. Get the tag name. Get text is displayed, is enabled. Right. Sometimes what happens, an element is there in the page, but it is displayed. It is not displayed. For example, a CSS menu. Right. The elements of the CSS menu are hidden. When you move them out, then they get displayed. Right. So functions like this is selected. Send keys. Send keys function is used to to write something in a text field. Okay. So I'll tell you. Hold on. When you get this username object, when you write over here username dot, you can use the function send keys to write into this. Okay. Now when you run your gmail.java, when people learn Selenium, they look at this thing, they find it easy, they learn it, but they actually don't know what are these classes, why am I writing a dot over here, why am I... Look, the basics are very important. If you're gonna go for an interview, hold on, this hello is written. See that? Browser got opened and hello got written inside it. Right. So I was talking about, if you go for an interview and if the interviewer is technical, he will certainly ask about the basic questions, that what is static, what is non-static, how does Selenium identifies objects, what is the architecture of Selenium. You know, nobody will directly jump on the question that tell me how do you make a project. Okay. If people can jump over to that question in an interview, but if the interview is sensible enough, he will never go on to the project directly. Because if you have your basics clear, making a project is not a big deal. Okay. Now, every time when I am working with Selenium over here, what I have to do, I have to move over to the documentation, right? Go to documentation, minimize the documentation, then work with Selenium, then again go to the documentation. I'll tell you a way in which you can actually import the documentation into Eclipse, right? Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to import this documentation in Eclipse, right? It's quite easy.